for Christ to reveal himself to women, he took a stand.
He took a stand.
To do that, to say that, hey, I'm not like the others, I am different and I stand for the lost and the lowly, whom you consider lowly.
Father, why is it called Good Friday when that was the day that Christ was crucified?
The beauty of Good Friday is when humanity was at its worst, God was at his best.
That point of time, Jesus came and said, don't commercialize religion.
He enters into Jerusalem and everyone sings Hosanna, Hosanna. The same crowds will shout on Good Friday, crucify him, crucify him.
This portion of the Garden of Gethsemane, you get to see the humanness of Jesus, which makes it so relatable that even he had to go through it.
When we love people and we give of ourselves in service, we will make India into what it is meant to be.
April has been a very spiritually charged and significant month for people of all faiths. And during this month, Christians observe the Holy Week, which culminates in Easter. But beyond the celebrations and the commercialization of the holiday with Easter eggs and bunnies, there is a broader theme of salvation. To understand the biblical significance and get some lessons from the Holy Week and the resurrection of Christ, we have with us two very special guests on Buzz by the Bay. Father Nigel Barrett, spokesperson of the Archdiocese of Mumbai, and Sister Florina Joseph, sister of the Charity of Nazareth and volunteer journalist with the Vatican News. Welcome on Buzz by the Bay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
This is a very significant week, the Holy Week, which starts with Palm Sunday and culminates in Easter, and each day has a significance. So first off, let's start with that. If you could briefly explain the significance of this Holy Week.
Holy Week starts with Palm Sunday, and that's when we have this procession into church where people wave palms, which is why it gets its name Palm Sunday. And Jesus enters into Jerusalem as a king. And while he enters into Jerusalem and everyone sings Hosanna, Hosanna, the same crowds will shout on Good Friday, crucify him, crucify him. And that is the fickleness of human nature. The very people who will praise you one day will be the ones who will condemn you another day. And that's something that Holy Week starts off telling us, that nothing is permanent, nothing except our relationship with God. I won't focus on the Monday and the Tuesday and the Wednesday because they're not very significant. But for the Christians, it starts with Maundy Thursday.
Maundy Thursday.
Which is the Thursday that is special. And for the Christian community or the Catholics, there are two significant things. One, institution of the Eucharist, which is what is central to our faith. And the second is the institution of priesthood, where Jesus says leadership is about washing the feet of people, about serving people. And then he says to his disciples, take this and eat, this is my body, take this and drink, this is my blood. An invitation that says you break yourself, you need to serve people. And then it leads us to Good Friday, where Jesus is crucified. It starts with Maundy Thursday into the night, where he's taken on trial, betrayed by Judas with a kiss, before Pilate, before Herod, back and forth, put onto a cross, journeys on that cross, taken to the place of the skull called Golgotha, crucified on around 3 p.m. Israel time, and then of course buried thereafter in a tomb. And then the story goes, on the third day he rises from the dead. So there's a great silence on that Saturday, and then that Easter Sunday where Jesus rises from the dead. So we journey through these days.
Beautifully explained, and I like that. The whole lesson is the unpredictability of life and how fickle people can be, because the same people who shouted Hosanna are now shouting crucify him. Maybe sister, you could just briefly tell us what Monday, Tuesday signify, in this Holy Week after Palm Sunday, how Jesus goes into the temple, and what is essentially the issue that there is with the religious leaders of the time. What was the issue he had with them at that point?
See, at that time, the religious leaders were more hypocritical. So they would say a certain way of things using power to get benefits, to get money, to get people into a certain kind of group, just more for their benefits. And somewhere around that time, salvation had taken another meaning.
Okay.
So it was not for the poor, the lost. It was more for, the rich, and you had to be a perfect person to come closer to God. So at that point of time, Jesus came and said, don't commercialize religion.
Don't commercialize religion.
Religion. Don't commercialize God. And faith cannot be commercialized in any way because it is addressing to somebody who's divine.
Yeah.
So that was on Monday and followed by Tuesday. Would you like to take over?
So Tuesday was about Jesus saying you have to be fruitful. You have to bear fruits in abundance. And he says, look at this fig tree. It's not bearing fruits and it needs to be cut down and thrown into the fire. So he cleanses the temple. He makes a cord, a whip from the cord that he was wearing, drives up the money lenders, and they challenge him. And he says, don't make my father's house into a den of thieves. That's the significant line that is there. And Tuesday is about telling people, you as believers need to bear fruit. Your life has to bear witness to what you believe. Don't say words and practice something else. Your life automatically bears fruit.
So the fig tree is a metaphor for how you need to be
productive,
productive,
fruitful, yes.
Productive, serve people.
Serve people, yes.
And just to clarify, when you say temple, it's a Jewish temple you're
yes,
talking
the
about.
Jewish temple, yes, the Jewish temple, and this has got to do with the Temple of Jerusalem was the special place of worship for the Jews.
Yes, of course, a Jewish temple. So the predominant religion, of course, the only religion presiding in that time in that region was Judaism. He was trying to reform it. He felt it had become too commercial. Then what happened is he was known as the king of the Jews, or so that was the title. And the Jewish elders or the religious leaders took offense to that. They wanted to
do away with him, yes, sorry.
Also, it has a relation because a Christian life is born on values of compassion, love, forgiveness. And somewhere, if you see the relation between Monday and Tuesday, it was, if you're hypocritical, you're not bearing fruit. You're just like the cursed fig tree.
Commercialization of religion is something that has happened right now to every religion. I don't think any faith is spared from that right now. That is the era we live in, right? I mean, but that's a whole other discussion where we want to, maybe we can touch on that later. But coming to Good Friday, Father, why is it called Good Friday when that was the day that Christ was crucified?
The beauty of Good Friday is when humanity was at its worst, God was at his best. When humanity was baying for blood, God was forgiving. The very words from Christ on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It was, today you will be with me in paradise, to the thief who was at his side. These were not words of anger or malice, but words of compassion and love. And it tells us that even when people are against you, you don't have to respond to them. You have to work, or you have to live your life from conviction and live your life in faith. And forgiveness and love is central to our faith, any faith experience, irrespective of which religious tradition you belong to.
Okay, so of course it's an example of, it's the hope of salvation, the belief being in simple terms that the sins of humanity were paid for by the death of Christ, and even on the cross he had an attitude of forgiveness.
Very true.
Also, before Christ died, the cross had a different meaning altogether. It was a symbol of shame, persecution, and a lot of negative vibes
Of course.
for the cross.
Yeah.
But once Jesus died on the cross, it's the meaning of the cross has been transformed. Now it's a sign of salvation, strength.
You've explained this very well, why it's called Good Friday. But what is this? There's a connection between Passover. What is a Passover-Easter connection? It all happened during Passover feast.
The Passover was a special time for the Jews where they came to Jerusalem to remember a very significant event in their history. Now, the Jews were under the Egyptian captivity, and they were out there serving the Egyptians. And Moses has this dialogue with Pharaoh saying, you need to lead my people and you have to let them go. And Pharaoh refuses, and there were 10 different plagues that happened.
Yes.
The final plague was the Passover, in which the angel of death passed over the houses of the Egyptians and killed the firstborn in every house. That's the tradition. Now, the Jews were spared that because they had the Passover meal in which they took a lamb and they used the blood of the lamb to mark their doors to say, we are Jews staying in this house, and so the angel of death didn't come to their houses. Now, the significance was that the Jews remembered the day of liberation that the Passover signified, how they were taken out of Egypt through God's great redemptive power. And so the Jews would always assemble in Jerusalem to celebrate that. And so Jesus goes with his disciples to Jerusalem, which is the Passover meal which happens on that Maundy Thursday night. But then the Passover gets a new significance because now it's not the liberation of the people of Israel to the promised land from the Egyptians. Now it's a liberation of the people of God from their sinful ways into a new journey of hope, a new journey of life. And that's what the significance of the Passover for the Christians is. You're passing over from the old self to a new person.
Old self.
The newness life, the newness of life.
Okay. So at that Passover at one point meant the liberation of the Israelites, but for the Christians, Passover was sort of a liberation from sins.
True.
As such. In simple terms, Easter marks a resurrection of Jesus 3 days after his death by crucifixion. But it also, the symbolism is, it celebrates a defeat of death and the hope of salvation. So when you say defeat of death, I mean, what do you mean? Like, how would you take this lesson in everyday life?
I think the greatest lesson that we can learn is to never give up. Life throws challenges after challenges at us, and sometimes we find ourselves in situations that seem to be a dark place. And the resurrection, or the story of the resurrection and the faith in the resurrection, helps us understand that God conquers darkness, conquers defeat, conquers death, conquers all things that pull us down, and shows us the power of love, the power of hope, the power of joy. It's about learning to live like Christ, and the triumph is about death. Is the significance is all that pulls us down, and the resurrection is what gives us hope. So in our own life journey, what's the things that are pulling us down, and how can we bring hope in what seems to be a difficult environment?
Well, and it's so nice, just to add something, it's so nice that every religion in their own way talks about this sort of resurrection. I know Christianity, you all don't believe in rebirth. Hindus, we believe in the cycle of birth, rebirth till you get moksha. So defeat over death, let's say in Hinduism, is also a big concept, but the concept is one of moksha, freedom from that cycle of birth. Or you can achieve that in your lifetime by being called what you call a Jivan Mukt, means a person, a realized person who's beyond the fear of death and, beyond desires. Coming to Lent, Easter is a joyful end to the Lenten season of fasting and penitence. So that's 40 days leading up to Easter. Again, how it coincides basically with Ramadan, with Navratri, which is also a time of little bit of fasting. So they all sort of, coincide with each other, which is very interesting. But now coming to Lent, this 40-day length of Lent, it's directly tied to the biblical narrative of Jesus' 40-day fast in the desert. But a little more about Lent.
So it's got more than just the 40 days fast in the desert. It's the 40 years of the people of Israel as they move towards the promised land. So the Passover takes them out, and now they're journeying towards this promised land, and for some reason or the other they keep going around in circles and they just don't reach the promised land. And for 40 years they struggle with their own identity as a nation. But the Lenten period is significant of the journey that all of us are called to make in life, of what we need to move towards, the better version of ourselves, So every Lent, it's like a spiritual upgrade for ourselves to be better versions of what God calls us to. And it has both an individual dimension and a communitarian dimension. As an individual, I seek how to be better. As a community, I seek how to respond to the needs of the world in compassion, love, and charity.
That's lovely. And again, I'm just trying to draw parallels with, let's say, Ramadan, which zakat or charity is a big part of that phase, to give to the needy people. And for your own personal sort of spiritual growth, a bit of controlling of your senses, a bit of withdrawing your senses, avoiding temptations. That is the great thing about, like in yoga, you call it pratyahar, a withdrawal of the senses. So this is avoiding temptations, because Christ also battled, the temptations of Satan while he was in the desert, right? I mean, Satan tried to tempt him with power, with food.
The temptations of Christ, three very specific ones, because there were three temptations, 40 days in the desert. And here's the thing, at our weakest moment, we're most vulnerable. So, as scripture says, when Jesus had finished his 40 days of fasting, that's when the devil tempts him, not when he starts it. The devil uses scripture. He says, scripture says, if you ask, God will make these stones into bread. So the first temptation is about how very often we desire to have things that give us pleasure. And the bread is symbolic of the pleasure.
Yeah.
The second is the whole symbolism of power, which says, if you bow down and worship me, all this will be yours. And everyone likes to be in charge, and that's why Jesus emphasizes that power is at the service of people, not to boss over them.
Right.
And that's why at the Last Supper, he demonstrates that in the washing of the feet. And then you have the final temptation, which I think is the most common one, where we blame everyone else for our problem. Jump, don't take responsibility. The angels will protect you.
Right.
And I think that is the one that probably is the one that most of us fall into, because everyone is to blame for our predicament, and very rarely do we take responsibility for our own life and action.
Yeah.
And then Christ says, this is not the way it is. And take responsibility for your life. You will fall, but you have to get up from those falls.
Take responsibility. You will fall. I mean, you will do things that are wrong. You will commit mistakes. You will commit sins. But there is forgiveness, there is hope, and there is forgiveness.
And there's the whole aspect of life is about getting up.
About getting up. About resurrecting
Right,
yourself
in a way.
again.
Also, there's an element of grace. So during these 40 days, it's like it's a journey of a soul, knowing that I'm not perfect, I don't have it all, but I need the grace of God. So I think it's a time where God meets man, and that connection and that build saying that I'm not enough. I need God to journey in the dark moments of my life as well as in the pleasant moments of my life.
Yeah.
So it's like if you can't overcome a certain temptation, you realize that you can depend on the divine to help you through it.
Okay, absolutely. When you feel you're succumbing, don't be shy of taking God's help, Yeah, I mean, seek for his help. Ask and you shall receive, which is, I love that line, ask and you shall receive. Very often we just don't ask, for God's help when we should. There are, of course, many lessons that we can learn from Easter. Jesus himself was killed despite being an innocent man, right? He was sinless and blameless. So death could not hold on to him. I think that is essentially the lesson. And he rose again 3 days later.
Right. Well, the essence of the Christian faith, and I think St. Paul says it so beautifully in his letter to the Corinthians, chapter 15, he says, our faith is in vain if Christ doesn't die and rise. And so the resurrection is the key to the faith that we profess. Now, what does it really mean? It means that the journey of life tells us that there is a certainty after we die. The certainty is that we will be with God, and the choices we make here on earth is what's going to determine whether we're going to be with God or not going to be with God. But God desires every one of us to be with him. In the Christian liturgy, we have a very beautiful prayer which says, for those who believe, life has changed, not ended. So we believe that death changes your life, doesn't end your life.
Yes.
And now you're in the presence of God with him forever.
Okay, and so it's not, death is not, there's no finality about it.
Right.
So that's the whole, again, something that
Like
other
moksha,
religions also,
right.
like moksha, there's no finality. The soul travels on. The soul travels, and God wishes you to be with him in the kingdom of God, but ultimately your actions here on earth will determine. Again, similar to the concept of karma. Your karma will determine, the fruits later on. Coming again to this Holy Week, there's one particular story which is very touching because we see Christ's vulnerability. Christ's prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. That happens on Maundy Thursday.
Maundy Thursday.
It's a really powerful part of the Easter story, and because it shows that desperation and vulnerability even of someone who is God. Because he prayed, Jesus prayed and said, "Take this cup from me." And God said no to that prayer, right? Ultimately, he got crucified, but then Jesus also added that,
Not your
"Yet
will.
not my will, but yours." So it's the will of God. In a sense, God knows best. And he's taking you through this difficult path for a reason.
True.
And there's a beautiful quote from the Bible, a beautiful verse, John 16:33, which says, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Beautiful. Just
Beautiful.
overcome the world.
The context of overcoming the world is exactly what the resurrection is all about. That you transcend what is out here. You're not held back by human thoughts and processes, and now you can actually act in the same way God acts, in that divine capacity. And what you pointed out so beautifully at the Garden of Gethsemane, that's a struggle of human life. Things don't always go our way. We struggle in life, and yet the willingness to surrender to God, to say, if it was my choice, I wouldn't want to do this, but it's not my will. Let your will be done. And that's the prayer that he makes, and he goes through his passion and death. And I think the vulnerability of Jesus, because he sees the vision of what's going to happen to him, how he's going to be treated, the way he has to go through things, and yet he chooses to say, "God, let your will be done." Not an easy thing to do, and that's what we are all invited to understand.
Very poignant part of the story.
Also, this portion of the Garden of Gethsemane, you get to see the humanness of Jesus, which makes it so relatable that even he had to go through it. While he was praying, there were drops of sweat and blood that came. So the anxiety levels were really high, and it's so relatable.
It's very relatable, and it's very heart-wrenching also, right? I mean, when you know you're going to face such a horrible fate, but you still say, okay, at the end of the day, he did ask to be saved from it, but he said, "Okay, but it's your will." God didn't take the cup from him. And then he got betrayed by Judas, and then took him to Pontius Pilate, and then we know the story. You're a journalist with the Vatican, you're a volunteer journalist with the Vatican News, and you even did an internship with Pope Francis at the...
Not with Pope Francis,
Not with Pope
exactly,
Francis, okay,
but
at
with the
Vatican.
Vatican News Agency. Yes.
And so you spent some time there, you came back. I was reading in the Vatican News actually that Pope Francis said recently during, he made a speech in the square during the Holy Week, and it said how we are meant to carry our own cross during the Holy Week and help others all around us who bear the cross of suffering. So if you want to just comment on this, what does it mean, carry our own cross and help others who bear the cross of suffering?
So cross is a metaphor for our own personal suffering. All of us are struggling with something or the other, but we have a choice to grumble about it or to take it with acceptance and grace. So it's like I have a certain difficulty in my life, I accept it. At the meantime, I'm not going to be in my cocoon of suffering. I would also like to help somebody else who's going through a tough time, maybe similar to me. So it comes to an aspect of selflessness. And I think that's what Pope Francis is referring to.
Selflessness, yes.
Yeah.
Help, carry the cross of suffering for others, because in the Bible there is a story of Simon of Cyrene who
Assisting
carried
Jesus.
Christ's
Yeah.
cross part of the way. Whether he wanted to or not, the Romans forced him to carry it.
And that's sometimes the situation of life, that the journey of life puts us in contact with people that we need to walk with, accompany with, and journey with. And sometimes it is reluctance, but I think the beauty of Simon of Cyrene is once he put his hand on the cross, he didn't turn back. When you see someone suffering and you forget about your own pain and you respond to the pain of someone else, some of the other your own pain diminishes.
You focus less on your misery,
True.
right? You realize people in the world are going through the same or much more, and in service of others, you help yourself
True.
as well.
Very true.
In general, people are more familiar with Christmas, Father. But yet, the lessons from Easter are so powerful. Why is it that Christmas gets audience? Because it's a joyful occasion,
Sure.
of course.
Very often, because of probably not enough of knowledge about the festivities, people don't, while everyone would know about Good Friday because it's more popular, Easter doesn't get the same place in the world, mainly because of how the West has commercialized Christmas. Not so much about the lack of knowledge, but anything that you can sell. And that's why the Easter bunny and the Easter eggs become more important than the story of the resurrection.
Yeah.
Because it's all about the commercialization of things.
So why eggs and bunnies anyway?
So bunny is, so the egg is about the newness of life because it's about life and it gives life. The bunny is a tradition that came about the 3rd or 4th century, more to do with the fact that they are very, they tend to multiply rapidly.
Multiply, right, okay.
And so the life that they bring.
Life, all right, interesting.
but nothing to do with the Easter story. It's more
Okay.
traditions and a kind of a pagan environment in which it came out from. But now it's become a commercial thing more than anything else.
Mary Magdalene was the first person who saw Christ when he was resurrected. Again, a woman, So what is the symbolism, significance of that? Being a woman,
Okay, so this is my favorite part of the gospel, okay? Because as a woman, taking all religion into consideration, somewhere we fight for our roles, somewhere we try to see what is our relationship with God.
Yeah.
Okay, because unfortunately society has been always patriarchal. But this story of Jesus revealing himself to Mary Magdalene in all the 4 Gospels gives a very powerful testimony that a woman's relationship of God or experience with God was so close and so intimate that she shared a different life with him. And she was also a disciple with him. So there must have been something. It's like we all are figuring it out, but it's hopeful for us that God chose to reveal himself to a woman who was not considered as an equal human being at that point of time and context. And even at that point when she runs to the disciples and says, I've seen the risen Christ, they don't believe it. So we still have to tell our stories, our experiences of spirituality, our experiences of Christ, and I'm sure it will be something that the further generations can cherish.
Lovely, lovely. And as you said, women for a woman to be the first one to see him at a time when women didn't have equal rights, but yet there is a sort of greater emotional attachment when it comes to women. So
Also, I feel for Christ to reveal himself to women, he took a stand.
He took a stand.
To do that, to say that, hey, I'm not like the others. I am different, and I stand for the lost and the lowly, whom you consider lowly.
Yeah,
So I feel-
they had considered Mary Magdalene was like a kind
not just Mary Magdalene, women in general.
women.
So
Okay.
you don't hear a lot of women's experiences of Jesus, even in the scripture. It's very few here and there. But for me as a woman, it means a lot
Yeah.
to find inspiration of what a woman's story with Christ was.
Yes.
So for us, it's like a little
Victory.
victory.
It's a victory for the women.
Yeah.
Coming now, just to Christianity in India, being it's a minority religion. Being a minority religion, in a country, comes with its pros and cons, of course. How would you say the current atmosphere is? Do you feel safe in India, being a minority?
Well, I think our relationship or our understanding is more urban based, and so our experiences are always that of not being in any way under threat, because in an urban environment there is dialogue, there is understanding, there is a great amount of interaction with people of all faiths, and there is a genuine desire to work together on range of issues. And I think all people of good will see the needs of India and how best we can serve our country with love and compassion. There are concerns in rural areas, but most of it is stemming from misunderstanding and probably misinformation. Often it's got to do with political maneuvering rather than genuine concerns. I think we need to be respectful of each other, respect each other's religious traditions, understand the wealth and the depth and the beauty of each other's religious traditions. And while Christianity very often is assumed to be a young religion in India, it's well over 2,000 years old, because Kerala, the Thomas Christians, one of the apostles, were the one who came to India and talked. And sister is from Kerala, and she understands the Thomas Christians in many ways. But I think Christianity has seamlessly evolved, and I think our work is more in education, in healthcare, in helping people understand their rights, and to grow in knowledge of and respect for one another. I think that's where. So are we under threat as a minority? At least in the city, I've never found it the case.
Of course, Christianity is also associated with colonial rule, right?
True.
And hence will have a negative connotation for some people, because they'll say it came in with the colonizers, you try to change us and convert us, and the missionaries, and which brings me to a very sensitive and controversial subject is, I think, see, right now what we're seeing in India is a growing Hindu consciousness.
Sure.
Which is fine, because there are great things about it.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And that can benefit everyone. But I think the main issue that the majority has is the issue of conversion.
Well, that issue is surprising, because the population of Christianity has declined, not increased.
Oh, it's declined.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if we were actively converting, then the population of India would have been, the Christian population would be 7 to 8%, but it started with 2.3 and now it's come down to 2. So it's declining with a period.
It's declining.
With a period of time. So I think very often it's a misunderstanding. I think many people have gone through, including our politicians, have gone to Christian institutes. No one asked them to change their faith. Education's education, and that's it. And
So you're saying there's no active conversion?
there could be groups that are involved in active conversion, but it's not the mind of the church to convert. I think the greatest lesson that we can do is to live authentic lives of faith and inspire people by our lives, and let them choose what they'd like for themselves.
Okay.
Also, the majority is not on a, what do you say, act of converting people. It's just minor groups, but the majority is being affected by it. Like the majority of Christians
Right.
are being affected by something they've not even done, and are tagged under the tagline of converting people. Like if you see a few cases, people of who are randomly doing things just for the sake of serving people are accused of conversion. So where are you going to think, okay, can I just serve people for the sake of serving them?
Yeah.
And India was always known for its religious tolerance.
Yes.
But where is intolerance now coming into, and does it help the country in any way? Is something that we need to ask as Indians.
Like you rightly said, no, sisters pointed it out. There are some evangelical groups
Yes.
who actively engage in conversion,
Especially amongst, let's say, Dalits or tribal.
but that's a minority.
That's a minority.
That's a minority, and they are also not very successful because the bulk of, say, the Anglican Church or the Church of North India or the Catholic Church doesn't in any way actively engage in any kind of conversion. They believe in serving and witnessing our faith.
Yeah.
And that's all that we try to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying that. These are sensitive issues,
Sure.
these are controversial issues, and it's good to get a spokesperson to clarify these things. Any last message, let's say a teaching from the Bible to leave people with,
For me, the one passage that makes so much of sense for me, and it kind of helps me in moments of crisis, is the line from John chapter 3, verse 16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that those who believe in him have the gift of eternal lives." Now, for me, it's about God's love, choosing to love and to give someone who's precious to him. And I think for me, if when we love people and we give of ourselves in service, we will make India into what it is meant to be, a land of love, a land of tolerance, a land of peace, and all people living and working together.
Beautiful. Sister?
I would like to just give the 2 commandments that Jesus gave us, and it's so relevant to me even today. One is love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your being. And second is love your neighbor as I have loved you, or as yourself. I think if we can achieve these 2 parallels in our journey on this earth, I think we are doing what Christ wants us to do.
Thank you so much for leaving us with that very positive message, and happy Easter. And thanks for coming on Fast.
Thank you
Thank you so
for
much,
calling
appreciate
us.
it.